Record to the cloud. Great. So we're now recording. So Ian, I'm going to hand straight over to you and take it away whenever you're ready, mate.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tony. Yeah, I hope you can all see and hear me. If you can't, please let me know as soon as something goes wrong. I'm not 100% with this technology, but I'm just going to do my best.
Oh, hang on a second. Hold on a second. Hang on. Hold on. Where? Oh, there it is. On mute. Apologies. Oh, when I click on mute, everybody,
no, I'm fine.
on mute you. I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. Yeah. Yeah. All I was saying, yeah, thank you to everybody for coming to my talk here today. I'm very flattered by that alone. I'm very nervous, actually, having to talk to such a group of obviously educated, knowledgeable, and intelligent people. So please bear with me. Yeah, yeah. I'm wearing my Detroit Tigers hat today. I hope that doesn't offend any of our American cousins. Yeah, but I always root for the underdogs. Yeah. So yeah. So let's go. Yeah. So if we could stay on mute until I've finished, I'm going to try and keep it to about an hour or hopefully less. Then we can have a free for all at the end. You can tell me I'm Adolf Hitler or whatever you like. I'm looking forward to that. Yeah. But yeah, let's go. So yeah, first of all, what I'm going to do, the title of my talk is Oswald's Emotional Journey. I think it'll explain itself later on, I think. But I'm going to start off by showing you something. I'm going to go full screen and show you the acoustic evidence in a second. Yeah, this is courtesy of Dr. Donald B. Thomas, who is a Texas entomologist. Yeah, screen. Sure. Yeah, can everybody see that? Just give me a thumbs up if you see it. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So that's from Dr. Donald B. Thomas. That's a graphic representation of the acoustic evidence. That's what the HSCA used to divine that there was a shot from the grassy knoll. There was more than one shooter. That's the HSCA back in the 1970s, I think. Here's another picture of it in a second. Yeah. Now this is the same thing, but this is where Dr. Donald B. Thomas thinks that the shots were. He found 5 shots. Other people have found 4. Other people have found more. The official story is 3 shots, but what I'd like to draw your attention to is the 2 at the end, because it's very well known, especially since Oliver Stone's movie, that JFK's head went back and to the left. These 2 shots here are actually apparently 0.7 of a second apart, so they're almost instantaneous. Many people thought they were 1 shot, but several witnesses did say they heard 2 shots, which was pretty much like that, if you can hear that. So now I'm going to show you something that certainly convinced me. The soundtrack came from Godley and Krem, actually. It's the acoustic evidence with all the other noise removed and the gunshots enhanced. And I've synced it to one of the best Zapruder films I could find. So I don't know if you heard that, but 2 simultaneous shots at the end. His head went back and to the left. For me, that takes care of the forensics. So everybody's free to disagree with me about that. Anybody want to see it again? Give me a thumbs up if you want to see it again. Yeah, okay. We'll see it again. Here we go. Okay. So I don't want to dwell on that too much, but wait a minute. How do I get out of full screen? How do I get back to normal screen? Oh, I'm confused.
You should be able to
Yeah,
click
here we
on.
are. So I found it. Yeah,
Yeah.
got it. Thanks. Yeah. So we can watch that again later on if you want. I don't want to dwell on it too much, but to me that proves there were multiple shooters and more than 3 shots. So the question then becomes, well, why was Oswald in the TSBD? What delivered him there? And the research I've done over the past 45 years, and I wrote my book called I, Oswald, based on it. It's really, the question has always been Oswald's motive, because nobody could ascribe a motive. Basically, the motive they had was that he was a communist. JFK represented capitalism. That's why he killed him. But it's it's far too overly simplistic. So I'm going to take you through, this is just one aspect of my book. I'm going to take you through the research I've done. And what I want you to just think about, please think about what is Oswald's motive for being in the TSBD when that was going on. So we start in 1939. Oswald was born just after his father died, so he was halfway to being an orphan. The Lee in his name actually came from his father being distantly related to Robert E. Lee. So I wonder if that meant Oswald had something to live up to throughout his life. That's just a thought. Family was mafia connected. His brother said that he never experienced the family being together, and at 3 years old he was in an orphanage, so he had a pretty rotten start in life. 1948, his stepfather's divorce lawyer was Frederick Herman Korth, who, by an amazing coincidence, served as the 56th US Secretary of the Navy during 1962 to 1963 under Kennedy. And he was also Assistant Secretary to the Army. Now, this is just, many people dismiss this as just an interesting coincidence. But to me, I think this is where it started. I think this is where Oswald was basically, he was groomed to be what he was. I think this is where he was selected, because he had connections with basically with the Navy from the start. And his whole life was in the Navy one way or another after high school, from high school anyway. 1951, his school life was sketchy. He was dyslexic, and I have to say I identify with this because I had learning difficulties as well. And my mum was a teacher, so she was able to help me. And I did overcome it. And in the end, I got a master's degree. But I understand the struggle he had from that. This is how I kind of identify with Oswald to some extent. 1952, they moved to New York, the Bronx, where he was teased, meaning bullied, really, because of his shabby clothes and Southern accent. And his mother said that other kids made a big thing out of it. I mean, being dyslexic at that time, there wasn't really any diagnosis as such of learning difficulties. I mean, he would just have been labeled as retarded, basically. I'm sure everybody's aware of the struggle Tom Cruise had. I think there's kind of similarities in the way, because I think Oswald, because he was in the lowest of the low category, basically, he felt he had something to prove. 1953, he scored 103 in an IQ test, so he wasn't too far below average IQ on the official scale, but his mother believed he was highly intelligent, which he was actually. And she said he read books beyond his years all the time, not trashy things, meaning he didn't read comic books and stuff, but his mother also said something important. She said he just seemed to know things. One of the books one of the readers he read was Jack London, who was a socialist, and he wrote a book called The Iron Heel, which was actually one of the books that inspired Orwell to write 1984. So I think really Oswald's thing was he was against totalitarianism. What he was basically, he was anti-totalitarianism. I'm sure a lot of people are, so it's not uncommon. But I've read The Iron Heel, by the way, and yeah. His brother said he became obsessed with a TV show called I Led Three Lives. Now, this show is very important. I've seen I Led Three Lives. I've watched a few episodes. And it was actually, some of the scripts were written by Gene Roddenberry, who did Star Trek. But it was based on a true story. It was based on somebody called Herbert Philbrick, who was paid by the FBI to infiltrate communist cells, which may well have been spy cells in the US. And this was at the time of the McCarthy witch hunts as well, you know, when Red's under the bed. So there was a lot of anti-communist propaganda around. And I think this is what got into Oswald's head. He wanted to be another Philbrick. I mean, as his brother said, he was obsessed with this show. Yeah, so he was also playing truant at the time. He watched TV a lot, went to the library and started reading Karl Marx. So, I mean, people say, why was he motivated to read Karl Marx? Well, that's what Herbert Philbrick did. He pretended to be a communist, and he was very good at it, so that he could infiltrate communist cells, basically. Because of the truancy, Oswald was sent to the New York Youth House, which was a juvenile delinquent center for psychiatric observation. One aspect of his delinquency was he stopped saluting the American flag at school in the school assemblies. But the reason he was doing this, he was trying to imitate Philbrick because he was pretending to be unpatriotic, because that was how communism was seen. It was just basically a lack of patriotism. And so he wanted to see who would join him. He was trying to uncover the communists, basically. It was like a kind of game he played, almost. The maid, his mother employed a maid for a while, and she said his mother told the maid that she brought Oswald to the Jacobi Hospital for mental tests. And this was interesting to me as well, because he was this test for, you know, what is it, being dyslexic, or was it something, or for delinquency, or was it the beginning of some kind of brainwashing? Because, yeah, there'll be more about that later on. But I think, as I say, I think he'd been on the military intelligence radar from a very early age. So he was, while he was in youth house, he was had a report from somebody called Dr. Hartog, who said he had a schizoid personality, but he was not psychotic. And he said Oswald had an active fantasy life. He shut people out. This is also is interesting because, as I said, he was obsessed with I Three Lives, and he gets this thing about rooting out communists, basically. And yeah. Hartog's was interestingly connected with Dr. Ewan D. Cameron, who was contracted to the CIA performing experiments under MK Ultra. So there was a connection there. It was also came up this time that Oswald could be violent, especially to women. He pulled a knife on his half-brother's wife and hit his mother for not making meals. So this was an aspect of his personality. We're not dealing with a saint here. I mean, he wasn't a good person, certainly not by today's standards, in that sense. The family moved briefly to Dakota, and he made friends with somebody called William Henry Timmer. And he showed the other boys a communist pamphlet, trying to saying, hey, I'm a communist, who's with me? You know, let's all be communists. I mean, it was kind of a childhood game, but also it's also seems to be becoming a kind of obsessive compulsive thing. Because he was always doing this. He was always pretending to be a communist and trying to find out who the other communists were. You know, he was living out this fantasy of being the next Philbrick, basically. 1954, moved back to New Orleans, age 13, and attended 7 schools and 2 more. So his education was a mess, but he was self-educating himself in libraries and so forth. Both Oswald and his mother started working at the Dolly shoe store and got permission for school non-attendance, but they both got fired. I think this is where Oswald's politics started to get forged because he was, I think, basically a socialist. He didn't like the ugly side of capitalism. I think basically what he would have been labeled in at that time really was a new dealer, sort of Roosevelt's Keynesian economics, and he saw himself as a kind of Tom Joad figure from the Gapes of Wrath. That's the picture I get of him at this time. Not an out and out communist, yeah. But he didn't like certain aspects of capitalism. He joined the Civil Air Patrol with Ed Vobel, a friend. Now, the Civil Air Patrol is a very, very patriotic organization. It's the precursor to joining the US Air Force. And he worked a newspaper round to pay for the uniform. And he was reading a book at the time called The Perfect Marine. And his mother said that an officer came to the house to talk to him. So basically, he had military connections now, solid connections. And you know, how often does an officer come regularly to somebody's house? So I think they were encouraging his fantasy. You know, he had this anti-communist fantasy that he was trying to live, and I think they started to encourage it. And I think it was the beginning of a kind of brainwashing process, really. Yeah. Around this time, he met David Ferry, who was a gay, rabid, anti-communist liberal. He may have been molested by David Ferry, and it may have been used for some kind of blackmail, which was additional motivation. There's no proof of this, and there's nothing certain. But David Ferry did molest a lot of people in the Civil Air Patrol, a lot of boys, basically. Oswald wrote a letter asking to join the Young People's Socialist League, which was a brainwashing organization, communist brainwashing organization aimed at young people. This was at the same time he was in the Civil Air Patrol, tried to find a cell of the Communist Party in New Orleans. So again, this is Philbrick behavior patterns. He's living this boy's own fantasy. And I believe Oswald had a kind of hero complex. He desperately wanted to be a hero. He wanted to go from one end of the social scale to the other, you know, to be another Philbrick, really. Warren Garrett, who knew Oswald, this is 1956, sorry. Warren Garrett, who knew Oswald, said he was much shorter than he remembered him when he met him earlier, and he looked lost. So he hadn't been doing well over the last few years, probably some malnourishment and psychological effects from all the moving around. Oswald got involved in the Mansfield School desegregation riots during the civil rights movement on high school grounds in Fort Worth, Mansfield. This is the thing about Oswald. He hated segregation. As I say, the ugly side of capitalism, at that time, segregation, and that was the big left-wing cause, anti-segregation. It seems a bit crazy now in a way, since Black Lives Matter and so forth, but at that time, segregation was still happening in Dallas and a lot of places in America. Oswald joined the San Diego, California Marine Corps at 16, but got kicked out for being too young. So he studied his brother's US Marine Corps manual. His brother Robert was in the Marines as well, studiously, and rejoined at 17. 1957, he endured boot camp, an ordeal that fellow Marine Sherman Cooley called Holy Hell. But his instructor, Donald Goodwin, criticized Oswald for lacking in toughness and not communicating well. And his mother said she didn't raise her children to kill. So he had a violent streak, but we're not dealing with a tough guy here. You know, this is not a tough guy in the classic sense. I'm just going to have a drink of water because my mouth's drying up. That's better. April to May, he received infantry training. He sent most of his paychecks to his mother. So this is a good boy, isn't it? I mean, he's looking after his mother. Some reports say he was mentioned in dispatches several times. So we've got a good Marine here. May to August, he received training in radar, map reading, and air traffic control. So they must have recognized that he was above average intelligence, and this is not bad progress for somebody with dyslexia, is it? And also he had plenty of preparation for this with the Civil Air Patrol, because that's focused on the Air Force, etc. I'm just going to show you a picture from this time. So there's Marines one. Yeah. So I'm just going to share the screen again. Wait a minute, where's share screen? Yeah, share screen. Yeah. Okay. Can everybody see that? Give me a thumbs up if you can see it. Yeah. I mean, you've probably all seen that picture before, but they said Oswald wasn't happy in the Marines. That's why he wanted to defect. I mean, does this guy look unhappy to you? You know, this looks like somebody who's found his niche in life to me. Yeah. I mean, this is a very happy guy. But anyway, make your own minds up, really. Yeah. So now I've got to try and get out of this again. Yeah, here we are. Yeah. So yeah. He finished 7th in a class of 30 in aircraft control and warning operator course, which isn't bad going either. And also it should be remembered he didn't actually graduate from high school at this point. Hadn't graduated. Now, something else at this time, he made 100-mile trips to New Orleans to the Pfeiffer Dental Lab from the fall of 1957. Palmer McBride said Oswald said he wanted to kill Eisenhower around this time. So Oswald was prepared to go to extremes. He was living this Philbrick fantasy. You know, I'm against communism, I'm against capitalism, I'm against, you know, I'm a Marxist, who's with me? And he was prepared to go to extremes, or say he was anyway. He attended a meeting of the Amateur Astronomy Association and became unpopular for talking loudly about communism. This was at the time of Sputnik. So again, this obsessive compulsive thing, everywhere he goes, he starts talking loudly about communism. This is in the middle of the McCarthy witch hunts, by the way. And especially during Sputnik, a friend of McBride's father threw Oswald out for talking about communism. And he even drove away a date by talking about communism. So yeah, more, as I say, this seems to me like some almost obsessive compulsive thing he's got that the military is encouraging. I think what was happening here, he was actually sent on a minor infiltration mission to see what was happening in the Amateur Astronomy Association, to see if anybody thought Sputnik meant the Russians were better than America, basically, because that was a big debate at the time. Yeah. Mark Lane, the lawyer, talked to a former Marine, Bucknell, who served with Oswald in California, and said Oswald went to meet with some top brass there. Afterward, Oswald told him he would go to the USSR on assignment for American intelligence and would return to the US in 1961 a hero. So it was planned that he would return. The defection was all planned. 1958, he spent 8 months in Japan doing radar work for the CIA's U-2 program. Saw things other operators missed. Like his mother said, he just seemed to know things. So again, highly intelligent guy. He was good at looking for details. Now, the strange thing is he had a higher security clearance than his commanding officer. So the question here for me is, was he deliberately exposed to secret information to give him something to trade with the Russians? This is where the politics come into it. What was happening with the U-2 at the time, the U-2 spy plane program, was that they were having a mole hunt. There was a Russian spy somewhere in it. They didn't know who he was. Oswald learned Russian around this time using the Berlitz method and took a military language exam scoring 50%. Now, why would the military want him to speak the enemy's language? George de Mortenschild, more about him later, who was a CIA agent, said Oswald could speak Russian fluently when he met him. Fellow Marine Jerry Patrick Hemming thought Oswald was working for naval intelligence because of what he knew about his background. So he knew a lot about other people in his unit, and some people suspected him. Kay Pollard Griggs, whose husband, Colonel George Griggs, was a member of the Yale Skull and Bones Secret Society and head of NATO, said that Oswald was homosexually recruited at this stage. So again, was there some kind of blackmail going on? There's nothing to corroborate this. I mean, this might be just some housewife fantasy, I don't know, but it's certainly an interesting fact, you know, interesting fact that she said that. On October the 27th, he injured himself with a Derringer pistol. Even though he was doing well as a Marine, he made gestures that made him look unhappy. I believe this was part of his cover. He was building up his profile as someone who was unhappy with his situation. Self-harm comes up quite a lot. He was receiving communist literature at the time as well, and talked loudly about the advantages of communism. And all this was ignored by his superiors, strangely. And his nickname actually changed. His nickname when he joined the Marines was Aussie Rabbit. Basically, they thought he was a harmless cartoon character, really, at first. But then his later nickname was Oswald. I'm going to try and say this, Oswaldskevich. So they noticed a change in him. That's one indication of it. His fellow Marines had noticed a change. So his public image is progressing. Now, there was a memo saying a lot of things. I suggest you can find this in a lot of places on the internet. A memo received from the CIA. I'll come back to this later, but it said he received additional indoctrination, that's a quote, at Camp Peary, which was famous for its brutal CIA training methods. So they were probably training him to resist interrogation. Everybody said how cool he was in police custody after the assassination. And he told Judith Very Baker that somebody, according to her, somebody actually died during his training there. He also meets Richard Nagel, who's very interesting, in Japan. Nagel believed Oswald was a sincere Trotskyite, but that is not the same. Okay, that's a kind of communist, but not the same as being a Stalinist. He was given several assignments in Japan, Oswald was, and he was also given a tailored suit for dating geishas and trying to get Soviet Colonel Nikolai Eroshkin to defect. And he fell in love with one of the geishas. And he also frequented the Queen Bee Club, which was above his pay grade. So obviously he was being sent on minor infiltration missions. I'm just going to have another drink of water. Also, though, he saw many social injustices in Japan and communicated with left-wingers. So he was trying to root out communists here as well. But this was at the time when Japan's economy was still recovering from the war. So there was a lot of poverty. And I think he identified a lot with the poor people in that situation, especially the socialists who were trying to change things. For 10 days from March the 7th, he was stationed with his unit in the Philippine Islands on nighttime sentry duty. He inexplicably fired his rifle 4 or 5 times into the jungle. He was crying and told Lieutenant Charles Rhodes that he couldn't deal with guard duty. This is more, I think, of his cover story, trying to create an image of that he wanted to get out of the Marines and get to Russia. On April 11th, he was court-martialed for keeping a pistol he wasn't supposed to have in his locker. So he was put on KP duty for a long time, which isn't a pleasant experience. But I wonder, though, who gave him the gun? I mean, what was he doing with a gun, his own personal gun, in Japan, in the Philippines, etc. CIA pilot Robert Tosh Plumley testified in 2004 that he met Oswald on several occasions in connection with intelligence training matters. First in illusory warfare training at Nag's Head, North Carolina, where Oswald was taking a Russian course. June the 20th at the Bluebird Cafe, Oswald assaulted a non-commissioned officer who'd put him on KP duty by pouring a drink over his head, and they got into a fight. He was court-martialed again and demoted from private first class to private, sentenced to 28 days in the brig and given a pay cut of $105. But this is a very light sentence for assaulting an officer in that way. So again, what's going on? In November, Oswald returned to America and was stationed in Santa Ana, California, where again he worked in radar control. So they're still trusting him with high-level security work. He served in an electronics school in Jacksonville, Florida, and advanced radio school in Biloxi, Mississippi. Also received his high school level diploma at this time. So his education was progressing. His unit's function was surveillance for aircraft, but basically to train both enlisted men and officers for a later assignment overseas. An officer there said Oswald was a very competent crew chief and brighter than most people. So on paper, this guy was still doing a very good job, even though he was putting on this show of, oh, I'm so unhappy in the Marines. 1959, he took a Russian exam, scored 50%. At the same time of his discharge, he gave his friend Sergeant Roger Delgado the impression he was planning to study in Europe. He started to correspond with the Cuban consulate in Los Angeles as well, and to wear a suit not like a college boy when not on duty. So let's just have a look. Here's another picture. Share screen. Yes, share. So you've probably seen this picture before, but this is his college boy persona. You might have seen this, but this is the college boy. This is not like the beaten up guy in a t-shirt in police custody, and this is not like the guy in the backyard photos, is it? Which I'm sure you've all seen. So this is the image he was trying to put across at the time. You know, that I'm college material, basically. Look, I'm an educated person who wants more education. Yeah. So back to the meeting. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. So the early dependency discharge was not a dishonorable discharge, and he was granted it on September the 11th, 59. At the same day, he requested a passport to attend the Dr. Albert Schweitzer College in Switzerland. From 1953 to 1958, Percival Frack Brundage was president of the US fundraising body for that college. In 1956, Brundage was made Eisenhower's last budget director, and Brundage had CIA connections and was involved in the Operation Mongoose invasion of Cuba. So more connections there. The memorandum dated March the 3rd, 1964, from the director of the CIA, John McCone, to the head of the Secret Service, James J. Rowley, confirmed Oswald was sent as a spy and was trained for this by the CIA for naval intelligence. Trained for the CIA by naval intelligence, sorry. Yeah, so I'm just going to show you that quickly. You can find this anywhere on the internet. Here we are. Share screen. Yeah. So this is a very famous document. Sorry, that's only a very blurry copy, but you can find it in many places on the internet, and you can find it in a text file. But basically, it just says what I've just said. There's a lot more besides, like things like Oswald having a radio planted in his head. Very strange stuff. But people say this is a forgery, but if it is a forgery, it's a very, very detailed forgery. But I don't believe it's a forgery, personally. But you decide for yourself. Yeah, back to. Yeah, so. Yeah, around 1959 to 1960, Oswald was one of 6 or 7 impoverished young men, 15 Americans altogether, who inexplicably defected to Russia. This was known officially as the US Defector Machine Program. There's documents to support that. He said in a letter to his brother, if it came to it, he would kill any American who wore the uniform. So again, he's making out he's prepared to go to extremes, you know, to maintain his cover, basically. It's also been theorized that Oswald was sent to sabotage the Paris peace talks by giving information about the then secret U-2 flights over Russia. Yeah, this is where the politics come in again, because most people, including me, think Oswald was sent to try and uncover the mole in the U-2 program. Basically, he was hoping to be recruited as a double agent and find out who the mole was from the KGB, but that didn't happen. Oswald at the time was interviewed by US the press, including Priscilla John Macmillan, and in Russia he wore a suit looking like an American college boy, still hoping to get a university education. So that was his motivation, I think. I think he wanted to get a free university education. And he was briefly housed in a university there, but they decided to give him a manual laboring job instead, basically a factory job. So I think he was very disappointed about that, personally, because he always wanted a college education, I believe. He applied to stay in Russia. When it was refused, he missed an appointment with his tour guide and made a suicide attempt, but it was only a small wound. They recorded it in the hospital in Russia as a show of suicide. Again, self-harm was part of his cover. He's shooting himself, doing all kinds of things, and it worked. He was allowed to stay. 1960, he roomed briefly in the University of Minsk. I think he was optimistic at this stage, but instead received a mundane factory job, which he wasn't very good at. So I think he began to be dissatisfied with his whole spy thing from this point. He received extra pay via the Red Cross, which was strange, and was paid more than the head of the factory, because the Red Cross usually only deals with the military, along with other privileges. So he had plenty of money in Russia, and he was under the constant KGB surveillance, so they suspected him. Any illusions he did have about communism disappeared. He became very critical of it. Friends were surprised, Russian friends were surprised that he assassinated JFK, as he always spoke highly of him, saying he was the only sensible president. He had a friend there called Titovets, who became a neurosurgeon, who said they talked about the Athenian system, which was basically a return to the roots of democracy. So Oswald, for me, was against totalitarianism, but he was for very much democracy. He believed in democracy. He was popular with the ladies there, but had a failed love affair with Ella German, who rejected his proposal of marriage. So I think he was more disillusioned. He could have his cake in Russia, but couldn't eat it really, not altogether. Now, something which came up very interesting to me was Francis Gary Powers, who was shot down, whose U-2 plane was shot down over Russia, blamed Oswald directly for his U-2 being shot down. He said Oswald had given information to the KGB, which helped them to shoot his plane down. And Oswald said he had seen Powers in Moscow. The exact word was seen. We don't want to know what it means. That was in a letter to his brother, but there was something going on there between Oswald and Powers. But this is it about the politics, because it may be that Oswald was sent to sabotage the Paris peace talks by giving away information about the U-2 flights, which were secret. It was a big embarrassment for Eisenhower. And Curtis LeMay, the crazy general, he basically wanted to perform a nuclear first strike on Russia. This is on the record. And so I wonder if Oswald was a pawn in this. LeMay didn't want the peace talks, basically. 1961, he met Marina Nikolaevna Pruskova. I'm sorry about the pronunciation there. I do apologize. Who lived with her uncle, Ilya Prusakov. He was a colonel in the Red Army with the rank of Minister of Internal Affairs in the Russian equivalent of the FBI. She'd also met another de facto, Webster, in Moscow and talked with him, although it was claimed she couldn't speak English at the time. John Connolly, Secretary of the Navy, converted the honorable discharge to undesirable. So he did not have a dishonorable discharge. And Oswald wrote to him to protest, and it was passed on to Fred Korth, who was the head of the Navy by that time, who was Oswald's stepfather's divorce lawyer. So is this a weird coincidence or what? I think they really did this to reinforce his cover, because why would a very good Marine defect? So I think they're just trying to make him look like somebody they didn't want. On July the 8th, Oswald asked the US Embassy to return his passport. In Washington on July the 20th, 1961, the idea of Operation Northwoods was floated to Defense Secretary Robert McNamara, and it had the written approval of all the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the Pentagon. This was basically domestic terrorism perpetrated by the government to provoke an invasion of Cuba and a nuclear first strike on Russia. JFK said the meeting should be kept secret, walked out of it, then expressed his disgust at the idea to Secretary of State Dean Rusk. Alan Dulles, who's one of the people involved in this, he was fired not long afterwards. Other reasons as well. I think Oswald may have been a part of this operation one way or another, because it didn't go away. The idea didn't go away. 1962, his first child, June, also known as Junie, was born on February the 15th. I'm just going to have another drink of water. He wrote to his mother asking for things such as razor blades, chewing gum, and a copy of Orwell's 1984. Interestingly, the CIA had funded the 1956 film adaptation. So I believe Jack London's influence, Oswald was anti-totalitarian. That was what he was basically worried about. He took 1 year to arrange the paperwork to take Marina out. So he was due to come out in 1961, but it ended up being 62. Now, the very important thing about this, he wrote something while he was in Russia, which was called the Historic Journal. He called it that. People have just said that's a kind of testament to his ego, but it's actually, when you read it, which I have, it's a very detailed report on Soviet working practices and other things. And it was smuggled out in the form of notes, and they were very worried. He and Marina were very worried about it being discovered. So why was it so important? You know, why was he taking such a risk with his whole family, trying to get that out of Russia? And he probably rewrote it into more readable form later on for a man in Fort Worth who was probably his handler, probably David Atlee Phillips. So it was a rewritten account. The original notes disappeared. Part of the return journey on the US was on a military flight, which is interesting. On returning to Dallas, his brother said Oswald was surprised that the press weren't interested in his return. So I think this is more disillusionment. But what was happening in America at the time, Robert Kennedy had shifted the FBI's focus to the mafia. They were no longer trying to infiltrate communist cells. People were fed up with McCarthyism anyway. They'd had enough of it. Times were changing. So Cold Warriors like Philbrick and Oswald were basically becoming obsolete. Stenographer Pauline Virginia Bates said Oswald had the deadest eyes she ever saw, and he spoke very deridingly of the communist system. So now he was playing a disillusioned communist, and he was out of a job. So his cover, basically, of "I'm a communist, who's with me?" it just wasn't working anymore. Marina became disillusioned with Oswald, like many GI brides, when she found out he was a nobody in the US, basically. He became violent towards her. His streak came out again. But his mother pointed out that this happened in a lot of relationships, which didn't necessarily make him a presidential assassin. No excuses for that, of course, though. Marina wondered why such a rich and educated aristocrat like George de Mortenschild appeared from nowhere to be interested in a poor couple like the Oswalds, especially when no one liked Oswald. She also said she believed de Mortenschild was a CIA operative. He had international business connections and was apparently an associate of mafia boss Momo Giancana. For 13 days in October 1962, from the 16th to the 28th, the Cuban Missile Crisis took place. JFK was told by Allen Dulles and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, including the head of Strategic Air Command, Curtis LeMay. If you watch the movie Dr. Strangelove, you can see this whole thing being satirized, actually, especially Curtis LeMay, who wanted to perform a nuclear first strike against the USSR, but JFK replied he wouldn't be the one to do it. Apparently he was crying at the time he said that. So basically Oswald's career is going nowhere now. Oswald couldn't hold a steady job, mainly because he kept talking openly about communism, probably thought manual work was beneath him also, because he didn't like his job in Russia. But he was someone who'd been promised by the military he would be a hero, he'd be a second Philbrick. So that's why the guy stands, where the guy stands at this time. So beginning of 1963, he received a fake ID for Alec J. Heidel. And it was said he forged it himself, but Richard Nagel also had the same ID, but with his own photo on it. So Richard Nagel was basically another Oswald impersonator. And his friend Peter Gregory said Oswald spoke critically of the Soviet communism, but identified himself as a Trotskyite, and he still received Russian Party newspapers. So yeah. Robert Tosh Plumley said around this time, different factions within the CIA and Pentagon were fighting each other, some loyal to JFK, the president, but others wanted him dead. And I believe this is where the idea of the abort team started. So there were two teams. There was the assassination team and the abort team, both coming from the intelligence community. Oswald was led to believe he was a member of the abort team, I believe, because he very much supported Kennedy and democracy, and was anti-totalitarianism. Michael Payne said Oswald was interested in infiltrating right-wing groups in Dallas that were making threats against the president. So that was his job at the time. He was listed as an FBI informer, according to a lot of sources. As I said, Oswald was against segregation, which was a big divisive issue at the time. That was part of his cover as well. At a party in February 1963, Oswald met a friend of de Mortonshield's, a German oil geologist, Volkmar Schmidt. He said Oswald was obsessed, that his life was devoid of spiritual meaning, and he was seeking notoriety, which Oswald was prepared to sacrifice himself for. He thought Oswald was dangerous, and the CIA thought he was mentally unstable as well. He said Oswald had discovered determination to achieve goals. I believe this determination achieved goals, basically, which I believe was one of the side effects of his dyslexia, because he felt he had something to prove about his education and intelligence. Again, when you say dyslexia, Tom Cruise always comes up, but I've always noticed with Tom Cruise, he's a very, very driven guy. He always, like, he's got something to prove. And I believe the same kind of thing was true with Oswald, because I felt I had to prove something. I went through and got a master's degree. I'm not boasting here. I'm just saying that was my motivation, part of it. Yeah. So I can identify with Oswald's kind of motivation at this point. Oswald said he felt very angry about JFK's lack of support for the Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba, and was irrationally hateful towards him. Schmidt suggested General Walker, who was a segregationist, as a target instead of JFK. So really his covers changed here. It was, I'm a communist, who's with me, you know, let's uncover the anti-Americans. Now it's changed to, I'm anti-fascist, you know, who's with me. I'm a fascist, rather, who's with me. Yeah. In March, Oswald supposedly ordered the rifle, but there's doubt he even had a rifle. Much of the Warren Commission's evidence about his connection with the rifle comes from Marina, and she had very inconsistent testimony because she was being threatened with deportation by the FBI. The only other witness was de Mortonshield, who was the CIA man. At this time, the backyard photos come up, which people have said prove he was guilty, but numerous experts have pointed out that they're fakes. And however, Marina remembers taking one photo of Oswald holding a rifle over his head. And this was shown to his mother after the arrest, and they both destroyed it. So I believe what happened was there was one genuine photo, but the FBI didn't have access to it, so they just decided to forge their own, using a police officer called Roscoe White, because one of the negatives of something was found in his possession after he died. So he's trying to upgrade his image now from college boy to a Marxist hunter of fascists, a kind of Che Guevara figure almost. As always, prepared to go to extremes, because he wanted to infiltrate the assassination. Basically, he knew about the plot. Around this time, he got fired from his job and for talking about communism, and Marina was pregnant again, so he had a second child on the way. In April was the attempt on General Edward Walker, who was a segregationist who was fired by JFK. And Dallas still had segregation at this time. Oswald was not described by the witnesses, who said there were two shooters, and the bullet fragment found by Walker, General Walker, was steel jacketed, which would not have worked in Oswald's rifle. And you'd expect a general to know his bullets, wouldn't you? So it missed, even though he was sitting in a lighted window. Marina said Oswald confessed to her, but the bus timetables are wrong. and the assassins traveled by car. I believe, though, myself, that he may have been involved in a kind of supporting role, trying to get credibility as an assassin to infiltrate the plot. He's saying, look, I'm assassin material. I'm good with a gun. I'm a bit crazy. I can do this for you. Marina's pregnant at the same time that Jackie Kennedy lost her baby, Patrick. So Marina expressed a lot of sympathy for her, and so did Oswald. In May, he moved to New Orleans to work for Guy Bannister, who was supposedly ex-FBI, but probably was an FBI agent, agent in charge of the area, actually. First, Oswald offered to join and train the DRE, who were anti-Castro Cuban expatriates. Then he was attacked by them for distributing pro-Castro leaflets. So he was basically a chameleon. He was trying to infiltrate either side. There was suspicion that the DRA had Castro's agents planted in it and that they were walking around the streets of New Orleans. New Orleans police officer Frank Wilson said Oswald refused to pay the relatively small $25 fine, and he believed he wanted to be fingerprinted, photographed, and go to jail. And his bail was posted by a mafia lawyer. So this is more image. This is more, you know, look at me, you know, basically. More of his cover. Perry Russo categorized Oswald as a right-wing socialist. On TV, Oswald affirmed that he was a Marxist, but not a communist, using Great Britain with its socialized medicine as an indicator of where he stood politically, which I'm sure is where everybody in Britain stands these days, just about. So not really an unusual point of view. De Morton Shield actually categorized Oswald as a prototype hippie. Interestingly, in a radio interview, Oswald also said with some bitterness that the CIA was now defunct, specifically mentioning Alan Dulles, who had been fired. So he sounded very disillusioned with the CIA. So I think that's another indication of how his career was going. Jim Garrison used hypnosis to make Perry Russo recall a meeting with pilot David Ferry's roommate, Leon Oswald. Russo listened to Ferry discussing how to kill JFK with a triangulation of fire, saying it would be easy and then fly to Cuba, Mexico, or Brazil. Russo said he'd heard it all 10 times before. In an interview on YouTube, Abraham Bolden confirmed that the FBI had an undercover agent in the plot to kill JFK. I believe the agent was Oswald, although Bolden wouldn't say that because for whatever reason. Oswald was involved in a gun running operation with Bannister for the DRE. According to Oswald's friend Ron Lewis, Oswald knew there was a plot to kill JFK at this time, but Oswald didn't want to be involved in it. So he wasn't involved in the plot to kill JFK. Lewis said the boxes of weapons were very heavy and Oswald found the work difficult. So Oswald said he was going to quit. You know, this basically wasn't the glamorous spying life he'd signed up for. He wasn't going to be another Philbrick. I think he'd realized that by now. On July the 31st, 1963, following instructions from JFK to J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI seized armaments on Lake Pontchartrain, which is near New Orleans. FBI agent William S. Walter later claimed that Oswald was the FBI informant behind the seizure. So Oswald was working as a informant. Riley Coffee Company, Marina was overjoyed that he finally had a job, saying to Junie, "Papa loves us." So that was where his marriage stood at the time. Oswald told Judith Baker he was working for Bannister by going to the university campus to gather information for the FBI and recruit people to work for Bannister. So he was infiltrating by pretending to be pro-segregation and anti-Castro to identify right-wing radicals. But at the other end of town, he had to promote himself as pro-Castro, handing out leaflets, etc. When Ron Lewis first knew Oswald, he was pro-Castro, but then he became anti-Castro. In other words, he was a political chameleon as part of his cover, posing as a rightist or leftist to infiltrate. Also, Marina and Oswald were trying to find a way to return to Russia, so he was very disillusioned. On July the 27th, 1963, in the Jesuit House of Studies, Oswald gave a speech against the Cold War, capitalism and communism, but said the US was the lesser of the two evils. So he was patriotic, you know, he still was patriotic in spite of his problems. In that the communist system is worse. So he was a centrist, not a radical or extremist. As I say, a New Dealer. His politics actually meshed a lot with Kennedy's, and what he describes is a lot like LBJ's Great Society program of the 60s, welfare state, etc. Around this time, Oswald actually met Philbrick, who was in New Orleans, and called him a pseudo anti-communist along with Joseph McCarthy. So he didn't believe in the witch hunt anymore, basically. So his hero had feet of clay. On July the 29th, he told Judith Berry Baker, they are going to kill JFK, and Oswald was trying to infiltrate the conspiracy. Yeah, Oswald believed he was being set up to be the patsy, which is a mafia term. But if he talked publicly, they would kill his family. So he was being blackmailed, basically. He had no way out. Oswald decided to run for office at this time and wrote a manifesto for a new, truly democratic political party. Communism offers oppression, capitalism, poverty, both create imperialist injustice and two brands of slavery. So the Athenian system, Oswald discussed with friends in Minsk, would have the best qualities of the two on an American foundation. I've read the notes for his speech for this. He said it would abolish nationalism, fascism, racism while promoting free collective enterprise and free healthcare, which we hear a lot about today. So he was ahead of his time in that sense. Again, this is not out and out communism. Yeah. As I say, and resembles LBJ's Great Society program. 3 months before the assassination, Ferry and Shaw ordered Oswald to apply for a job at a local mental hospital, and they both drove him there. Oswald had heard the job was available from a barber in the neighborhood, Edwin Lee McGee, who said he didn't need a haircut, and jumped when he said there might be a job in the mental hospital. Jim Garrison believed all this was the conspirators trying to associate Oswald with mental illness, sheep dipping, this is called, I believe. Oswald probably thought it was good for his cover when he walked into the hospital acting crazy, saying he was going to kill Castro personally. I think he hoped they'd incarcerate him because that was part of his cover. Look, I'm crazy enough to be an assassin. I'm good with a gun, blah, blah. He wasn't, although he filled the form in for the job. According to other classified files, Viola June Cobb reported to the CIA's Mexico City station in October 1964 that she'd learned from a prominent Mexican writer who was probably Octavio Paz and two other Mexican sources that they had all seen Oswald at a dance party that was also attended by Cuban diplomats and others who'd spoken openly of their hope that Kennedy would be assassinated. So he was basically infiltrating in Mexico as well. What he actually did in Mexico is pretty complicated, but there's also a lot of records. He definitely was in Mexico because his name's on the hotel register. And he was being set up at this time by impersonators going around doing weird things. I believe Nagel was involved in that as well. Impersonators were going around doing weird things saying, oh, I'm Lee Harvey Oswald. Yeah, I'm a bit crazy, etc. Then Leopoldo called Sylvia Odio, who was with the DRE, and said Oswald was loco, meaning he's crazy. But good with a rifle. The truth is, though, he wasn't. He was only just above the basic of 3 levels in the Marines. He did not receive sniper training. So he wasn't a very good shot, basically. He was also criticized during Marine training for not cleaning the weapon. Although Marina said he was constantly cleaning it on the porch, although the neighbors didn't see it. They only saw him reading there. Around this time as well, a plot to kill Kennedy in Miami was uncovered. It was led by a right-wing activist with KKK, Ku Klux Klan connections called Joseph Miltier, who said that after a few hours following the assassination, the investigation would find a supposed assassin to fool the public, a patsy basically. And Miltier said something which resonated with me, which said a rifle could be taken into a building piece by piece and assembled. Now, Bill Fraser, Bill Wesley Fraser, who drove Oswald to the TSBD that day, had a 4-door 1954 Chevy, which is significant because according to Fraser, Oswald put the package, the brown paper package, which is very famous, on the back seat by opening one of the back doors. And so Fraser got a good look at it. Later, someone showed Fraser a disassembled Carcano rifle, and he said it was absolutely not the right size. It could only have been to be a rifle. It could only have been altered by a gunsmith, which would have been very expensive. So why not buy a better rifle anyway? Yeah, Johnny Roselli labeled Oswald as a chump who knew too much. And so I think the mafia was certainly onto him. As with the Walker shooting, I think Oswald participated but didn't do the shooting himself. I think he probably took part of the gun into the TSBD to look like he was part of it. But an interesting fact here, because they say, well, it's just a coincidence he got the job in the TSBD 2 months before the assassination. And but the route wasn't published until about 2 or 3, 4 days before the assassination. And a very interesting fact, the Texas School Book Depository was owned by D.H. Byrd, spelt B-Y-R-D, who also started the Civil Air Patrol and was one of the Texas oil men. Now, they were, I don't know Byrd directly, but certainly Texas oilmen were bribing LBJ and others for military contracts for Vietnam at the time. Witnesses saw Oswald in the lunchroom and at the time of the shooting, and may have been photographed on the steps outside. 2 witnesses did not see him on the stairs when the Warren Commission said he was running down them. The gun found in the TSBD was a Mauser, not an Italian rifle. There's a signed affidavit from a policeman who used to own a gun shop to that effect. In the Texas Theater, Butch Burroughs served Oswald popcorn at the time Tippit was being shot, which was 1:15 p.m. The movie started at 1:20 p.m. I'm glossing over things here. There's a whole section in my book on the events around and leading up to the assassination. But my conclusion is, from the research I've done, is that basically Oswald wanted to be a hero right to the end. He started off as the lowest of the low, developed a adolescent TV fantasy about becoming a national hero, was encouraged by the military to think he could get a college education. But after Russia, he came to a loose end and allowed himself to believe he was part of an abort team. And they just kept encouraging his family. He was probably blackmailed as well. So he followed his orders right to the end. Yeah, trying to be a good Marine and a good spy and a good, his idea of a good person, basically. So that's the presentation. If it's okay, I'm just going to send everybody the ISBN and link to my Amazon page, so you can.
Yeah, that's fine, Ian.
Yeah, just a second. How do you do that? Where's the?
Yeah, just pop it in the chat.
Yeah, chat. Here it is, chat. Yeah. So, yeah. So, yeah, there it is. So, yeah.
Great. Okay.
So there it is. So if anybody wants to discuss this further than me, maybe I could give my email address to Tony, and yeah, I'd be very interested in anybody's reactions to the book. I think you can get it for free because I put it on Kindle, Kindle Select or whatever it is. So yeah, otherwise it's $3, but. Yeah, so there it is. So if you want to open the mics up now and you can tell me what you think and disagree with me, and we can let's go. Yeah.
Well, first of all, thanks a lot, Ian. Thanks for sharing your research and thanks for sharing your views.
Well, thanks for listening. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are going to be some questions. So I think I think I'm going to allow everybody to. I don't think I can unmute the microphone, but please unmute yourself and.
Oh, mate, am I muted?
No, you're fine.
Oh, I see. Everybody else. Yeah, so please unmute yourselves. Yes. Yeah. And, any comments, questions, whatever. You all look tired.
Just one.
Sorry, my fault. I know. Yeah.
One comment in. It was very interesting. Right at the start of your presentation, you mentioned the 5 shots. You showed us the
Yes.
graph of the shots, and the last 2. Alaric Rosman, one of our members, sadly he's now in a home, so he can't join us these days.
Sorry to hear that.
But he put up a link to a presentation given by Josiah Thompson of 6 Seconds in Dallas fame. And it was quite interesting. He did a very close analysis of the 2 frames in the film and showed that there was probably a shot from the back where Kennedy's head moved forward fractionally, and then the second shot arriving almost at the same time, which was the one that killed him, that took his skull out, actually came from the front or from the side and blew his head backwards. But it's quite interesting the way he actually measured the movement of the head. There was a forward movement of JFK's head just before the fatal shot.
Yes, yeah. There's a lot of debate about the acoustic evidence, and of course the Zapruder film, and the autopsy was very interesting for me because the doctors in Parkland Hospital disagreed with the Bethesda autopsy, and where they thought the shots came from was very interesting to me. It's worth looking at that. There's a section on that in my book because they dealt with a lot of gunshot wounds, so they knew what they were looking at. So to me, they were the authority. Yeah, and there's some debate between the doctors. They don't all agree with each other, but yeah, I'd refer anybody to that. As I say, there's a section on that in my book. What I've talked about today is just one small part of my book. I've got a whole section on the politics, a whole section on the forensics, a whole section on just about every aspect, really. It runs to 400 pages, but I sort of skipped through a hell of a lot of it today because I wanted to keep it to about an hour. But yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, I do want to look at more stuff to do with the forensics because yeah, I'm very interested. But thank you for telling me that. Yes, I'd like to look that up sometime. Yeah, if you got a link to it, I'd like to.
Sure.
I'd like to see that.
Sure, you should check out Millicent Craner's articles called "Trajectory of a Lie." They talk about the head going forward, and it talks about how basically matter will always try and escape from the highest point, and that's why the brain matter goes forward and knocks them back. It's very interesting. I'm not a doctor, so I can't really comment on it. But if you read the Millicent Craner articles, they're very, very good. And I think Dr. Antic talks about it as well.
And Sherry Feaster's book as well.
Oh yes, yes.
Sherry Feaster goes into the head movement and blood spatter because she was a court-appointed expert on, for especially blood splatter and that, and indicating that would indicate how someone was wounded or killed.
The shooter was on the other side of the plaza, of course, didn't she?
Yeah,
on the side of the plaza.
I can't remember the title of her book.
All day. I've got it right here. If you give me a second.
Something to do with a lie.
Was it enemy of the truth?
Enemy of the truth. That's the one. Yeah, I think so.
Oh, then it's there. This one here.
Yeah, that's the one.
That's it.
Yeah, she thinks that the shot came from the South Knoll.
Yes.
Yeah, which is possible given the where the car was, because it was on the road going down, and as you go down, it actually bends into the left, in towards the middle, and given that, plus Kennedy was leaning to the left, because Jackie was semi-cradling him in his arms, and it opened up the right side of the skull towards that direction. And it's I think it's Brian Killshaw. He's very much a supporter of Sherry Feaster.
Yeah, there were a lot of shots and a lot of shooters. I mean, people have counted 15 shots altogether. It keeps going up. bullets were found all over the place.
That, and you look at the impacts, the impact on the chrome, the impact on the tarmac, the impact on the concrete surround, James Tague. And that's before you even count the bullets to the colony and JFK.
Yeah, so that's why I became so interested. You see, so well, the guy didn't act alone. If he did act, and so why was he there? What led him to be there? And I was interested in Oswald as a literary character. Really, I mean, I wanted to write the book the book's actually written in the first person. That's why it's called I, Oswald. But I was just so interested in the guy's sort of upbringing and his life and his motivations, for ending up in that position. Because nobody's been able to give a solid motive for why he would be there, but I had learning difficulties, so it gave me a kind of insight, I feel, into his way of thinking and his way of looking at things.
Yeah, can I maybe interject something here?
Sure.
I think the motive for Oswald being at the Texas School Book Depository was because the man worked in the building. I think it's as simple as that. I don't think he had anything to do with the assassination. I don't think he pulled any triggers at all. I think he was an innocent man. The evidence states that he was innocent. He never had any forewarning of the assassination. And that's as simple as that. I think he worked in the building. You've got to look at people like Ruth Payne, who got him the job basically there. He told them that there was a job at the Texas School Book Depository.
Yeah, but she didn't. She also withheld. Someone had called the house with an offer of a job, and she didn't tell him.
Parking at the airport, So that's as simple as that. I think the man worked in the building, and that's why he was there. And when the assassination happened, you can speculate, whether his actions point to that he had any foreknowledge or whatever. But just by basing it on the evidence alone, the man's innocent.
That's a very good point, because as I pointed out in the story, he's desperate for a job. He's desperate for employment. So he'd have taken anything they offered him, really. Yeah, that's a very good point. And it was amazing to me that Byrd was D.H. Byrd owned the TSBD, though. To me, that was the coincidence. It wasn't that he was there at the time of this. It was the fact that it was owned by one of the Texas oil billionaires who.
John White, are you trying to come in with a question?
Yeah, sorry, John. Yeah.
No, it's just about Oswald knowing about what was going on. I mean, Judith Baker's book, I guess you've all read that. But she said he was very involved in it. So I don't know if people have read that. The other thing about the book you were talking about, with the shot coming from the south end, makes a lot of sense. Because that road there is an S-shaped bend, and the first shot lines up very well with the south end because it comes through the left-hand side of the window screen, and Kennedy was on the right-hand side. And I think if you look at that angle, it points very much down to the south end. Also, down there, you've got a car park with a big bunch of trees in front of it, and not a lot going, no people there. So that would be a very good place to set up. And this gives you your crossfire. You could still have somebody, on the side closest and somebody behind. And you got 3 points of firing, 3 points to fire from there. So I read her book, and it makes a lot of sense to me. His head was over on one side when he was shot. So it could well have gone in the right side of his head and come out the right side. Yeah, that's all.
Thanks, John.
Yeah. I haven't read her book, but I don't know, but I'm concerned that there is a shot through the windscreen. That doesn't sound like a good thing to do for a professional assassin.
No, but that is the right angle for the south.
Yeah, but I mean, would you really, if you're going to go into this triangulation situation, do you really want to put a shot through the front windscreen?
Well, it doesn't really matter, does it?
Oh, because it could get deflected.
Well, yes. It's unlikely. They said if they had a hard top on, it wouldn't have made a lot of difference.
The Secret Service people who were there at the time said when the shots were hitting the car, hitting the people in the car, I mean, they said it sounded like a sonic boom. You know, there were so many shots simultaneously.
Yeah, high velocity rifle is going to go through a bit of glass without any problem, I think. Probably not.
If you use the right ammunition, it would.
Yeah.
But with the windscreen at a 45-degree angle or whatever angle it is, isn't
Well,
that going to deflect it?
I don't think it's 45. That's the point. I think the car is almost facing the south end of the hole.
It'd be a lot less than that because the car's coming down the hill, and if they're relatively high up, the angle would be a lot less than that.
You mean the angle of the car?
I'm talking about the angle of the windscreen.
What you mean? The windscreen's not vertical?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah.
That's what
I don't know. I think
there's other. Tosh Plumley was on the South Bank, South Knoll as well.
Well, he says he was.
He says he was, and if he was there to abort, I mean, he didn't see anything behind him or hear anything or any smoke or anything.
Well, I mean,
that's what gets me.
He was smoking something.
I mean, he also said that Johnny Roselli was with him. Yeah, and Johnny.
I don't know whether to believe the story. I'm just saying.
Johnny Roselli himself apparently confessed to being down a drain hole and shooting Kennedy with a 2.2 rifle when he was in prison. This was.
I've been to that drain hole. I've seen it. I've been to Dealey Plaza. I've seen the drain hole. There's no way a shooter could have been in that drain hole.
No, well, again, you haven't got the angle there.
No, not at all. You'd hardly have seen anything, and the space, the window of opportunity would have been.
Don't forget the level of the road would have been a lot lower than it is now because it's been tarmacked and redone.
Also, it's still on a bend. You see, it's an S-shaped bend there almost, and that where that manhole is, he couldn't have got a first shot in or an early one. He just didn't have the angle.
I was on the South Knoll about 2010, maybe even earlier, with a Kansas City sharpshooter whose job it was to, in a hostage situation, take out the hostage taker without hitting the victim, the hostage. And we were both at Lancer, I believe, and I asked him, and I debated this with Sherry Feister for weeks, 10, 15 years ago. And I contended that the shot was coming from the sweet spot that Doug Weldon had located at the end of the overpass where it abuts the parking lot. And Doug Weldon said that was the only spot that would get you straight through the windshield. And some of the proof was that the photographer standing in front of the car, what's his name? Help me. Altkins, his view through the windshield when he snapped the picture that shows the steps, the depository, etc., also perfectly lines up with that spot at the end of the overpass on the south end, as if it's a straight line from that spot, in fact, to the steps and through the windshield into Kennedy's throat. Now, the sharpshooter said this shot would be extremely easy with a professional scope. It would look as though I was standing where Altkins was, and a high-powered bullet would go through that windshield like butter. So that was pretty convincing, along with Doug Weldon's analysis that showed that to be the spot. Now, there was, as I mentioned back in May, there was a sewer, which was a mirror image of the sewer on the North Knoll, not on the Elm, but up on the hill. That has since been covered over. At the time, it was surrounded by a gravel parking lot that, you know, theoretically somebody could have been in that sewer with a, let's say a van parked over it with a false bottom to exit and enter the sewer. Now, I don't think they needed to do that. They probably just sat there because there was nobody else there. At any rate, that's another version. And Sherry would not, she insisted that the shot had to come from on the overpass, as I remember the debate. At any rate, we passed and we didn't finish the discussion ultimately. But Ian, I'd like to ask you another thing. You mentioned early that Oswald moved to North Dakota. You said Dakota. Do you have any more elaboration on that in your book?
Only that, yes. Well, there's a paragraph on that. Yeah, but the key name there is the friend that he had, because his mother wrote to LBJ to tell them Oswald had been in Dakota after the assassination. She said, "I remember that kid." Yeah, and
Right.
so he, yeah, I'm just going back through it now to try and find the. Yeah, wait a minute. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So that's fairly well documented. Yeah. That
Yeah.
he was in Dakota. Yeah.
Now that I have an article about that along with John Williams on.
Oh, great.
Armstrong.
William Henry Timmer. That's the name.
Yeah, it's on Armstrong's Harvey Lee site, if
Right.
anybody's interested. But John Williams and I spent time there and tried to flesh out what may have happened. Long story. But
right.
I talked to Timmer and I talked to his mother back in 2000. And very interesting characters. They were definitely involved in something that they were trying to hide.
Right.
And I ran it by Peter Dale Scott, and I mentioned this back in May also in my talk. He said, well, you know, Oswald wasn't necessarily there, and the people who say he was weren't necessarily telling the truth.
Yeah.
Obviously. Well,
this is the two Oswalds.
Yeah. And Armstrong's position is that was Harvey. And this place in North Dakota was populated by a large number of Finnish communists. And so the profile for framing him as a communist fits his summer there in 54 when he was 15 or 16. I'd have to look at
yeah.
But at any rate, the critics say that Elaine Mosby that interviewed Oswald in the Metropole Hotel the next day after he left the embassy to try and defect, Oswald said, then we moved to North Dakota. But she puts in her memo to Alan, who Alan Belmont receives in Washington that following Monday. And ostensibly, Belmont, being up to his neck in the assassination, in my opinion, may have changed North Dakota or New Orleans, N-O, to N-D, which could easily be mistaken depending on one's penmanship. And so that created the opportunity for the critics to say, well, he didn't go to North Dakota. That was meant to read New Orleans or N-O. Well, until you go to North Dakota, to the very village where he went, until you do that, you don't see pulling a string opens up a whole world of connections as to why Oswald would have gone there.
Yeah, and that's what I found with this. Yeah.
When I talked to Timmer and his mother, it really indicates that there was a whole lot going on there, that the FBI, when they visited on December 23rd, a month after the assassination, basically couldn't get to. couldn't, they had to spend more time and they didn't, and it was Christmas. So at any rate, I think when you allude to Dakota, I appreciate that, because I think it's real. And
oh, that's good to know.
look, if you want to look at Armstrong's page, Harvey and Lee, it's fleshed out more there.
That might be where I got it from, actually. Yes, I sort of, yeah, I mean, that's, yeah, I did go through quite a lot of that, and it is very interesting. Yeah, in my book, I kind of allude to the being two Oswalds, but that would have sort of lost the thread, really. I was pursuing the guy basically who ended up in the Texas theater, who they arrested. That was
right.
who I was looking at. So I just followed his lifeline. But there's very credible evidence there were two Oswalds, yes, and it's possible he could have been at two places at once, like the dental laboratory. I mean, he was supposed to be in Japan at the time as well, and the school records. He had a record of being in a school for a whole semester when he wasn't there. He was in New York, so, but things could have been, I give it a bit of a, because like, I was a teacher, so I know school records get backdated and things like that, so I've got to take it with a pinch of salt. But yeah, it's very credible. There may well have been two Oswalds, I think. I mentioned that in the book, but I didn't actually follow it up too much. Yeah. But because that would have been a whole other book, that would have been twice as long, and
Ian.
Yeah. Hi.
Ian, do you find Marina Oswald credible?
I think she's more credible now than she was, because she was being threatened with deportation, and the FBI were being very nice to her, so it was sort of carrot and stick. And she'd say anything they wanted at the time, but she's gone back. There's a very interesting interview on YouTube with her, with Oprah Winfrey, and she goes back on a hell of a lot of what she said before, and she says he's innocent, he didn't do it, he liked Kennedy, he had no motive, and a load of other stuff as well. And so I think she's more credible now than she was, but she may still be pressurized. I think the cover-up is still going on, so there may be pressure for her to say what people wanted to say.
Have you read, I've posted this in the chat, and so you might be interested to read it.
Thanks so much, yeah.
Basically, the Warren Commission needed Marina, okay?
Yes.
So they used her testimony. Now, they didn't find her that credible, okay? Now,
No, there's a document to that effect, actually, yes.
The HSCA, okay, didn't want to use Marina, and in fact, they compiled a 29-page report. And on this report was called Marina Oswald Porter, Statements of Contradictory Nature. And it's 29 pages long.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, fair enough, she might have been threatened with deportation, and people will say that her credibility is better, but I just can't, just because she says Oswald is now innocent, doesn't mean she's got good credibility. And I think her credibility in this case is shot to pieces.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, yeah, if you tell a lie once, you're a liar. That's right. I mean, yeah, but then again, she is the sort of closest link anybody's got to his state of mind and his home life at that time. So I think some of what she says does have some sort of credibility to it, but of course, it's always got to be taken with that very large pinch of salt. Yeah.
But so, she said that he wanted to kill Richard Nixon. The only
that was true.
The reason that people think that he tried to take a shot at Walker was because of Marina in her testimony. And if you actually read her testimony regarding the backyard photographs, she actually says she's asked, did she destroy one of the photographs? And she says something to the effect, yes, I was told that I had burned it. Yes. Now, wouldn't she know if she burned it or not? I mean,
I heard they flushed it. They burned it and flushed it.
But this is what I mean. The woman's testifying that yes, I was told that I had burned the photograph. I mean, to me, she has no credibility whatsoever. And I mean, if you look at it from a legal standpoint, okay, backyard photographs couldn't have been used in any court case of Lee Harvey Oswald, because
no, they never had enough to convict him.
No, in Texas at the time, there was something called marital privilege law. Okay.
Yeah.
That means that a spouse couldn't testify against a husband and vice versa. Now, the only witness to the backyard photographs is Marina Oswald.
Yeah, the only thing that, yeah, sure, I understand exactly. Yeah, but the only thing that gave me credibility was that his mother said she saw the photo as well. You see, that's what I understood. So they both seen. Marina showed his mother the photo in the police station after the arrest, and it freaked her out. And it had a message saying "to my daughter Junie" on it, and that freaked her out even more. So that's why I've kind of included that. And I think there was a photo taken, but I think the FBI forged the ones that they had. You know, I mean, I think they didn't have access to that one photo, and they wanted something that was more credible, really. You know.
Why would Oswald address a photo with him holding a rifle?
Well, that's it. Yes, I mean, yeah, I mean, why would he shoot himself in the arm with a Derringer? Why would he try to commit suicide? You know, what? It was all this thing of being prepared to go to extremes. To, you know, he had to change it. He'd been putting himself across as a college boy. You know, I'm an American college boy. I'm an intellectual, and then he had to infiltrate the right-wing assassination. He had to show basically, I'm one of you, you know, here I am, I'm crazy enough, I've got the skills with a gun, you know. And he had a thing about Che Guevara, you know. He was he did have some kind of what's the word, some kind of respect for Castro, maybe, you know, but then again, he was going to assassinate Castro as well. So yeah.
I mean, but think about it. I mean, the man is how can I put it? The man is hanging around, if you want to call it, in New Orleans with men who are rabid anti-communist.
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
Can you name? Sure, okay. Here's a question. Can you name me one person who was a friend of Lee Oswald's who was communist?
No, what was it? Michael Payne claimed to be some kind of socialist, but I don't think, as far as I know, he did. But no, I don't think he really was a communist as such. I mean, I think he was a centrist. You know, he was a, you know, what would it be called, a pinko, or maybe at the time, you know, I think he was not much different to where most people stand today, really. But I think the context of the time, you know, he would have been seen as some kind of radical because America was so segregationist and anti-left wing and anti-communist that he would have been identified as a radical, you know, because of his off-center view, left of center views, you know. So
when he was arrested after handing out the leaflets with Carlos Bengoa, can't remember, is it Martello? I can't remember his name. The officer who arrested them.
I can find that. Yes.
Oswald said to him that he wanted a meeting, an interview from the FBI.
That's right. Yes. Yes.
Told him, I think it was it Kent? I can't remember the guy's name, but he says, get blah 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 from the FBI and tell them that you have Lee Oswald in custody.
Yeah, that was his handler. That's who he was reporting to. Yeah.
But this
I'll try to find that. Give me a second. Yeah.
What kind of socialist or communist is asking for meetings with the FBI and actually getting them?
Well, that's it. Yes, I mean, it was his job. You know, he was a paid informer. There's pretty much there's documentary evidence that he was a paid informer. And
no, there's no documentary evidence whatsoever that Oswald was a paid informer, FBI informer. As a matter of fact,
some people said they had his.
Yeah, that what they say. Sorry, what they say is one thing. What they can prove is another. There's zero proof to confirm that Oswald was an informer. As a matter of fact, the whole fairy tale of the informer was actually started by Lonnie Hodkins in Dallas, a journalist, who passed it on to William Alexander, who passed it on to the Warren Commission. And the next thing you do is basically have all kinds of people basically trying to figure this out. And the whole thing is one massive speculation exercise. So I'm sorry to interject, but there's zero proof whatsoever that Oswald was an FBI informant. Absolutely nothing.
Yeah. Well, all I'm saying is there's people who believe he was, and they had his FBI informant number. And yeah, some people believe journalists cooked it up, but there were people in, I'm just trying to find the section in my book, actually. There were people in, here we are.
It's the same thing with the...
No, that's right. Yeah. What I've done... Oh, sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, it's the same thing with the Heidel card. Now, I don't believe the Heidel card ever existed.
Well, the Heidel card is, I wrote an article about this 2 weeks ago. And my point is, when did anyone actually start to talk about the Heidel card? Well, no one started to talk about the Heidel card until the 23rd. There's not one shred of evidence, be it written, be it verbal, whatsoever, that supports that Oswald, that the card that was found allegedly in Oswald's wallet was a Heidel card. It was absolute rubbish. The 5 people that were part of the arrest team of Oswald never made a statement on the 22nd or the 23rd, or even better, early December. So you're talking Paul Bentley and, you know, all the other guys, basically, Gerald Hill, that all said that about Oswald's Heidel card. The Heidel card gets a mention in a report by Manning Clements, an FBI agent, who shows up at 7:30, yeah, around that time, to interview Oswald, to ask him very generic questions about his height, his schooling, this, that, and the other. But Oswald's being taken away for a lineup with the Davis sisters. This is around the time that Oswald has just been indicted for murdering Tippett, and when he comes out the elevator after the lineup with the Davis sisters and does the I'm a Patsy movie part that's been captured on video as such. Clements basically talks to him before he goes on the Davis sisters lineup and just after. Although in his Warren Commission he says it's 10 o'clock. That's wrong, because there is no lineup at 10 o'clock or just after that. So, and also I've got that documented in Marlon Hall's of the DPD, who is very precise with all his timings, and basically points out at that point that he was there around 7:40. Now, Clements writes that on the 23rd, in his report, that he says he saw it lying there on the table alongside all his other stuff. But there's no one, and I mean no one, who asks a question. Will Fritz doesn't ask any questions about the second ID. James Bookhout, James Hosty actually starts noting the evidence on the table after the first interrogation, right? So Oswald goes off on the first Helen Markham lineup after 4 o'clock because he talks to Forrest Sorrells first. Then he's gone. And then Hosty starts basically noting down all the items of evidence in the room next door. There's not a mention of the Heidel ID whatsoever. But you know what? Lo and behold, Saturday morning in Chicago, they find an order by A. Heidel, boom. And guess what happens next? At the end of the first of the interrogation on November the 23rd, so that's the 4th or the 5th, don't know at the top of my head, 4th or 5th interrogation, they all of a sudden at the end ask about, and it's actually Bookhout, yeah, FBI, that Bookhout is asking him about the Heidel ID. Not even Fritz at that point. And it's at the end of the interrogation of that morning. It's complete rubbish. If you cannot find the connection, if the Heidel ID isn't mentioned on the 22nd by anyone, not even the people that arrested him on that day, not even on the 5th of December when they also put statements together. Bentley is interviewed on WFAA television the next day. Doesn't mention anything. Gerald Hill is interviewed twice. He spells Oswald's name out. He doesn't even spell Heidel out. But then later on during the Warren Commission, oh yeah, we're all singing like a bloody canary. And the whole thing is basically put together that they found a Heidel ID. And the whole fairy tale just goes on and on and on. If you can't have an Heidel ID there on the 22nd, you can't make the connect to the rifle. It is only after they find the order of the rifle, they find the Heidel ID. It's a disgrace, because that way you can make the connect to the order. But there is no connect because there wasn't a Heidel ID on the 22nd at least. And I doubt there was one on the 23rd either.
But
My 2 cents.
But well said, well said. And I think there's some common sense that needs to be interjected as well. Now, the story goes that Oswald orders these rifles under the name Haddell, okay? Now, he's just allegedly taken this rifle linked to Haddell up onto the 6th floor and shot President Kennedy. He leaves the rifle behind that's linked to Haddell, but he keeps carrying about in his pocket an ID with his picture and the name Alec Haddell on it. Why would he be carrying
Oswald was the dumbest assassin ever known to mankind. Simple as that.
Yeah.
That's what they'll say. The dumbest assassin ever.
Exactly.
And the only one to escape using public transport. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Richard. He didn't go by bus either. That whole thing is a fugazi. It's a total fugazi. The bus ride never happens. The whole thing is a joke. It's Swiss cheese. Roger Craig was right. He jumped into that car. That's what happened.
There's a lot of debate about the evidence. Yeah, I mean, I go into a lot more detail in my book. As I say, I had to gloss over things to keep things down to about an hour. Yeah, I mean, I've tried to base everything on the informer stuff basically came from William Walters, who was an FBI agent, and the Haddell ID. What gave that credibility to me was that they found one on Richard Nagel when he was arrested, apparently. So yeah, but there's a lot of debate about the evidence, how it was listed and how it was accounted for, and the chain of possession, things like that. I mean, including the bullets, everything like that. I mean, I've got a whole section in my book on the cover-up, which is where people were forging evidence, people were destroying evidence, and a lot of it done by the FBI. So yeah, it's difficult to say really, but he did, as far as I know, use the name Haddell around because Marina again said it was one letter away from Fidel, you know. So yeah, it was. That's why she found it amusing, you know. But
there's no proof for it. I mean.
Oh yeah, I mean, the proof is sketchy for just about everything, you know. I've just tried to link, in the book, I've tried to link everything to a name so you can follow it up. You know, if you want to follow up William Walters, you know, if you want to follow up, you know, Haddell, or you want to, I've tried to put everything there. So the idea behind my book, you see, it wasn't to be the definitive book, because that would be a whole library, really. I mean, the point of my book is to try and encourage people to do their own research. That's what my book's about. I mean, I think there's a danger. Yeah, I just finished. Yeah. There's a danger the younger generation are losing interest in this, you see. So yeah, sorry, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Ian, do you have anything in your book about Adrian Alba? Do you recognize?
Yes, I know the name. Yes, yeah. I mean,
well, I interviewed him in about.
I ran the garage. Yes. I remember you saying in the previous meeting. Yeah,
in 1988, and you know, he seemed authentic.
Sure.
I talked to him numerous times, once in New Orleans and then from Minnesota, and recorded him, which was legal to do in Minnesota. And I was listening to the tape the other day because Bill Kelly wanted to know some information from it. And I had forgotten that Adrian Alba said in passing, he said, you know, Oswald already had a Mannlicher Carcano, and then he ordered another one from the magazine.
Oh, that's very interesting.
That I had in my office. And so either Adrian Alba was lying, or, I mean, he did fabricate simply because anybody hypothesizes and speculates, and he wasn't immune to that simply because he took license with the fact that he knew Oswald, and Oswald would come over to the office in the garage every day for a pop and sit and read the magazine.
Read his magazines. Yeah.
Then the problem is with witnesses like that, then they take license and think that they can go off in lots of directions and it'll be
Sure.
more legit than what other people say. Well, at any rate, the fact that he talked about in detail how he tried to sight the rifle in and couldn't do it, and added a piece of belt, and Oswald gave him a piece of belt, and they stitched them together, and he said there's no way I could make that thing fire straight. The scope wouldn't fit straight, the strap
that's what
wouldn't
the FBI expert said.
yeah. And so he
in the tests at Edgewood Arsenal afterwards as well, they had to add shims to the telescopic sight in order to sight it in.
Right. And so
Which
Alba
heats
has
the
a
rifle.
lot of seemingly detailed experiential evidence that says Oswald had a gun, but he also alludes to the idea that Oswald was involved in Estes Kefauver's gun control committee in the US Congress in order to show that you could order a gun easily through the mail. Now that's, I don't know whether Alba was extrapolating and guessing, or whether Oswald told him that. That's the problem with a witness like him. But you know, his main evidence is he held the gun when they handed it to him at the Warren Commission. He knew it was the same gun. The bolt almost fell out, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So there was a gun someplace.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting to me. Yeah, I remember you talking about that in the previous meeting, and I'd like to know more, actually. Yeah, as I say, what I was trying to do with the book, I mean, things may lack credibility. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, Oswald had an operation while he was in Russia, and they believe, and some people said, oh, he had a radio implanted at his head at that time. And I thought, well, that's ridiculous. I thought that's absolutely ridiculous. But that document I showed you, the CIA believed it had credibility. You know, the CIA believed he may have had a radio put in his head. That's in the document. So, I mean, maybe the document's a forgery, but so the approach I took with the book is, okay, this may sound ridiculous or this may not have credibility, but do your own research, check it for yourself. You know, as you've checked with witnesses yourself. And decide for yourself, basically. You know,
right.
As I say, my conclusion from my research is that Oswald, you know, was motivated in the way I've described. But you know, somebody else may reach a different conclusion. You know, but based on what I've researched, that's what I believe, really. Yeah. Sure. So what you're saying is massively interesting to me. Yeah, because you've actually talked to witnesses. I based actually. With the, but what I did, I started with the forensics, and when I saw that, actually that soundtrack to the video I showed you, that was made by Kevin Godley and Lol Crem, the musicians. And
yeah,
when I saw that,
the documentary for Channel 4, didn't they?
Yes, that's right.
Dispatches.
Yes, that's right. It's on YouTube. Yes, yeah. And I worked backwards from that. I started going through videos of the witness documentaries. I'd done a lot of research before that, but I tried to keep an open mind. And people were saying things that were contradictory, but at the same time, I realized a lot of what was being said, a lot of the stuff when I followed it up, it was overlapping. You know, the story. There was a sort of through line. There was a sort of plot line running through it all from what witnesses were saying, you know. So some of the witnesses may be lying, some of them may be exaggerating, you know, some of the facts may be off skewed, but I believe, you know, that what I put together follows the general story of Oswald's life, you know, where he was coming from and going to, you know. So yeah, but as I said, the only thing I could say is just please read my book, decide for yourself, you know, and I hope the book will provoke people to follow up the facts, well, the evidence, I can't say facts, but evidence that I've looked at, and decide for yourself. I mean, you know, I mean, certainly I've found, everything I've found has been the opposite of the Oswald did it, lone shooter, you know, the Warren Commission was right. that's all been totally discredited for me, you know. And I can honestly say I kept an open mind, because there was a point when early in my research where I thought Oswald had actually done it. I thought, oh yes, the guy did it. That's pretty certain. Then the more I went into it, the deeper down the rabbit hole I went, the more I found, well, this is, you know, it's not that simple. He didn't do it, you know. He may have been involved in some level, but certainly, yeah, he certainly wasn't a lone shooter, yeah, etc., you know. So yeah, but that's what the book's about, basically. It's trying to give people leads to follow, you know, and give them and at the same time just give them an interesting, you know, it's a very exciting spy story to me. That's what I mean, it was like reading the Bourne books or something like that, but this is real, you know. The other thing is, a lot of the facts, they don't ring true because they're so crazy, you know. But like the coincidences, like his stepfather's divorce lawyer becomes head of the Navy, you know. I mean, who would believe that? If you wrote that in a fictional book, nobody would believe it, you know. So there's all these very, very weird coincidences, you know. And if you accept that, well, maybe it's not a coincidence, then you've got to find, you know, some other motivation behind it, you know. I mean, it was quite shattering to me to find D.H. Bird owned the TSBD. And he actually went and had one of the windows taken out, and it wasn't the window on the 6th floor either, afterwards, to keep as a souvenir after the assassination.
Ian.
Can't remember which window it was, but yeah, sure. Hi.
Yeah, hi there. I just want to touch upon something you said earlier about the case losing a lot of interest to younger people.
Yeah. Well, you're obviously very young, so
yeah. Well,
that's reassuring to me, actually. Yeah, that's great.
I mean,
I'm 61.
I've had an interest in this case since, believe it or not, since I was about 12, 13.
Oh,
not
I do believe it. Yeah.
That I do now.
Yeah.
My dad used to read up about it, and then he used to tell me stuff about it. So I naturally became interested, and I can remember at the time the History Channel was showing the episodes of The Men Who Killed Kennedy.
Yeah.
And all,
yeah.
A natural thing.
Mm.
But the reason I think a lot of people turn off from this subject is because of the various conspiracy theories that surround this subject.
Yeah,
and
sure.
I don't think people can be bothered with it. Now, to me, I've actually co-authored a book that's coming. It should have been out in November. It's coming out now. There's still a lot of editing.
Oh, great. Yeah.
But it's basically just dealing with the physical evidence of the case, not telling you who killed the president, not telling you where shots came from. It's just dealing with essential physical evidence against the accused.
That's certainly needed. Yeah.
Just go through it and just basically destroy the case against Oswald. So actually, Joe Tonahill, who was a defense lawyer at the time, said that in his opinion, the judge would have actually been forced to tell the jury to come back with a verdict of not guilty based on a week's.
Hey Johnny, did you read Walt Brown's book, Walt Brown's People versus Lee Harvey Oswald?
I think he's got it there, hasn't he?
It appears in Frozen.
He's got a lot of books. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a...
Yeah, what
yeah,
we're waiting. Yeah, here it is.
I asked that one there.
Yeah, I might have a later edition, but yeah.
Is the first copy of that book that ever went into print. I got it from
breaking up.
Yeah.
You're freezing, Johnny.
Walt himself. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead, Johnny, you're fine.
You disappeared.
Yeah. So that's the first ever copy of the People versus Lee Harvey Oswald. I got it from Walt directly.
Yeah, that's very good book.
Can I ask a question?
So
I
he
tried.
really is.
There are some great books out there.
Yes, I'd like to get. I tried to get this look at the book on Amazon. I couldn't find it, so I need to know the.
Yeah.
The link works.
Yeah, you can find it with the link. The link there goes to my author's page, and there's all my books on there. I usually write SF, but the Oswald book is the one with the more colourful cover.
What's the name of the book?
It's called I, Oswald, I, Oswald.
Oh, okay.
And the name of the author is I.E. Kalenda, Kolenda. Yeah.
Kalenda?
I'll try and send it out again. Hold on.
Oh, so you don't use your name, Ian?
Well, no. It is actually my middle name. Kalenda is actually my middle name, but it's a bit like Eric Arthur Blair using George Orwell. I just think it's a bit more exotic than Ian Hughes. So yeah, but I'll send the link. Yeah, if you go to amazon.com//e/ then it's BOOEKN6LYM. I put it up on the chat. If you go back a bit on the chat, you can see it up there. 10:06 a.m. It says. That may not be the right.
I've just popped a link in the chat, which will bring you straight to this page that you can see.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, that's great.
No problem. That brings you straight to the book. Yeah, $3.
Yes, that's it. That's the one. Yeah.
But do you run
I couldn't find it myself, actually.
But do you run the Lone Gunman page on YouTube, by the way?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The channel, you mean?
Yeah, I watched that. There was a great interview on that that you put up with Harold Weisberg. Now, I think he was interviewed, it must have been the 90s, and he's talking about, he's got loads of filing cabinets behind him, and this guy's interviewing him, and this guy's basically saying that to him, so the answer to who killed the president is not in any of these filing cabinets, and he says no, because the case was never investigated. And it's a great interview. I think it lasts for about 20 minutes, but it's a really good one that you put up. I don't know if you know the one I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think so.
It's really good because he's basically saying that the case was never investigated, and so we don't know who killed him. You know, he says that by default that it should always be known as a conspiracy, but that's as far as it can go because you'll never know who killed him. But it was really good. I had a sneaky suspicion it was you that ran it. I just was trying to double check.
Yeah, I thought your presentation about the rifle was brilliant. Yeah, I was. I want to go through those again in some detail. No, as you were saying about young people not being interested, I'm sorry that sounds a bit derogatory. What I mean is that it's kind of getting sort of sidelined as a kind of like the Lincoln assassination. You know, it's just a piece of history in a dull old textbook. You know, and I found the whole story very, very interesting, you know, and I was 4 years old when the assassination happened, so I remembered it, and that provoked me all my life to research further, actually, you know. So I'm just trying though to just make sure it doesn't get sidelined, you know. I mean, it is a very and it's so relevant to today because really history changed direction at that time, I believe. That was what I found from reading the book. A lot of what I turned up actually was truly shocking, you know. I mean, I researched the politics behind the whole thing, and even whether you believe Kennedy was assassinated or not, you know, by Oswald. I mean, just the politics around at that time, like, Curtis LeMay wanting a first strike on Russia and things like
Northwoods and that.
Northwoods, yes, yeah, and that's all true. I mean, that's all very well documented, you know. So, I mean, that was the context, you know, the political context for whatever Oswald was doing at the time, you know. I mean, I've tried to make the book as accurate as I can make it, but I didn't want to, you know, sacrifice factoids or, you know, bits of information or bits of evidence. Well, this may not be true, so this will discredit the book. I said, okay, I'm going to put it in because somebody might follow this up and find that something behind it. You know, that was the scenario with the book, really. Yeah. So basically, I was trying to write, you know, just an interesting factual spy story. That's why I did it in the first person. You know. So yeah. But, hi. Sorry.
You ever been to Dealey Plaza?
No, I want to go. I went to Detroit. I'm sort of working through my list of my great American journey, which I've done a bit of it, but I really wanted to visit Detroit, so I did that. But no, I want to check out Detroit and Cape Cape Canaveral, and yeah, I want to go to Nag's Head actually because I know someone who lives near there. So yeah, a lot of stuff. Yeah, I envy you going there. I have to say, yeah.
It was funny because I remember when I went to Dealey Plaza and it was raining the first day, and there was a guy trying to come up and hand me a newspaper, and he was basically
a lot of hawkers.
Is he still there?
Yeah, they're still there. Yeah,
brilliant.
They were like, they were trying to tell me where the president was shot from, who shot him, and all this.
It's usually about half a dozen or so.
Oh yeah. I think it's. I think they hand out stuff to do with Robert Groden. I think it's his.
Some of it he usually purchased himself up the top of the steps.
Yeah, I met him. I actually met him a few times, Robert Groden, when I was over there because I got a tour for Lancer. But I'm going to go back. I think I'm going to go back in next year. I think I'm going to go back next year. So anyone that wants to come is more than welcome.
Yeah, if I can scrape the money together, yeah.
I'll try and save up for 23, the big 60.
Yeah. Well, we could put back to 23. I just, it's funny though, because once you've been there once, it's kind of weird because I was there for 5 days and it was like I'd done everything so many times that you kind of just got like, oh, it's time to go home now. And that was after 5 days, but I would like to go back. I would like to go back because the one thing I never saw was apparently now that you can get into the jail or they're turning it into some sort of museum where all the stuff and the jail cell he was held in. So I'd like to see that. But yeah, apart from that, I've seen basically everything, I think.
It's turning into a kind of JFK theme park, isn't it, Dallas? It's, no, I certainly want to go there. Yes, it's strange though because I've done so much research into Dealey Plaza. I feel it's a place I've never been to, but I know all the cracks in the pavement, and it's a very weird feeling. I've never been to this place, but I know so much about it. I've seen computer recreations, and
how small it is.
The ricochets in the pavement.
Yes, that's what I want to check out. Yes, I'll see it for myself and put my fingers in the wounds. Yeah.
You think that the place is huge, but it's tiny. You don't.
Yes.
Gary.
Yeah.
Gary, I'm trying to direct message you, but I don't think you see my messages. Would you mind responding, please?
Well, I went into the Amazon page, and
I mean here, in Zoom.
But I can't get back from the Amazon page. All I get is the thumbnail profiles. I did get back once, and then I went back to Ian's book, and now I'm stuck.
I will email you instead then. Okay, thanks. Sorry for the interruption.
Tony, what time's the rugby kicking off at?
It's already underway, mate, the rugby.
Is it?
Yeah, it's been underway. It's 3 apiece. It's 17 minutes left to go.
I
don't want to be responsible for anybody missing the rugby. Sorry.
No, you're not responsible. This is meant to happen.
Scotland's already beaten England this year at the rugby.
This is much more interesting than rugby, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely.
Who needs rugby? I mean, you can talk.
Ian.
Dealey Plaza.
Ian, if you since you go to cold cities like Detroit, if you ever have the urge to go ice fishing in Minnesota, and this goes for any other Brits here, you got a place to stay here in suburban Minneapolis.
Oh, that is so kind. Yes, and I'd love to try ice fishing as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a hoot.
Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah, I like fish. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, that's so kind. Yeah.
They come out pre-frozen then, Gary. Yeah.
Well,
frozen fish.
Your hands are pre-frozen.
Yeah.
Peter, when you went to Dallas, did you go to Washington afterwards?
No, that was Adrian. Hey, Johnny.
No, I got it as well. I finally got it,
Yeah, he said it unexpectedly through the post.
I was the same. It just came, So, yeah, if you've never been to Washington, I went to Dallas to Washington because I wanted to see John Kennedy's grave and RFK's grave.
Yeah, that was when we were in 2013. Adrian was there. We sort of split costs for like hotel rooms and stuff because it made sense with the stuff. But he when he was going on to Washington there to stay with relatives. And it was at that point where he was packing up. He had the bloody great winter storm coming southwards, and all the domestic flights were disrupted. Thankfully, the international ones were still okay, so I managed to get home. But he had to take instead of flying, he had to take the train up.
How long did that take? Flight only takes about 2.5 hours or 2 hours.
If that's so. Yeah, that was Adrian. I think he got there all right. It just took him quite a bit longer than he expected.
Yeah, Washington's nice. It really is nice.
Built on a swamp, possibly, isn't it? Was it built on a swamp?
I don't know, but I know that it was very